Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money, millennials, and the young at heart. Welcome world to yet another episode of our favorite show about money and favorite show period, Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. I am joined by my trusty host, Mr. Malcolm Ethridge. What's up, Mr. Malcolm?
I'm good, man, but you missed something. This is the award-winning podcast and show.
It's still not natural yet.
Yeah, I get it. It takes some time to get used to.
It's like when you get married and you move from fiance to wife.
That was an interesting period. Good
Was
point.
it?
Yeah.
Indeed. It takes a minute.
It does.
It's like my wife.
I actually think girlfriend to fiance takes a little longer to adjust to, personally.
Okay.
But anyway.
All right, indeed. In news about the show, not too long ago, a few weeks back, Malcolm Ethridge was quoted, ladies and gentlemen, drum roll please, in CNBC. Big time.
I wish they'd asked me to come on, but I guess that's like second best.
Baby steps.
Got to start somewhere.
Baby steps, brother. You were quoted in the CNBC article about what?
It was about actually like not good news. It was about the fact that the auto loan market has gotten completely out of whack and is basically in the same place as the subprime mortgage business that got us into trouble 10 years ago.
I remember now.
So we've now gotten up to 84 months auto loans, where 72 was the new standard at 6 years. That people were like, oh my God, 72 months.
Right.
Because 60 months is basically the standard 5 years.
Right. Now we're into like 7
Now we're
years.
at 84 months, 7 years, because auto lenders are basically just trying to stretch that thing out as far as they possibly can to make it affordable for people who they're charging 18, 20, 22% interest rates on the car so that they can drive off with that car.
At the same time that I believe cars are getting more expensive.
Cars are getting more expensive because they're getting more technology features on them.
Right.
Also, like we're going further and further deeper into the credit scoring profile. So where prime is, I think, 640, below 640 is considered subprime. Okay. So now we're beyond that and we're into the fives in terms of credit scores. In terms of credit scores to be able to get approvals. Right. And that alone means that you're going to pay higher interest because you're a higher risk. Okay. Which means that I've got to stretch the car loan out now so that the monthly payments are still similar to what you've been able to pay, and I can justify to the bank this person can actually afford it on a monthly basis. So I was basically like quoted as slamming that practice as not the answer to the problem.
I see. And if you'd like to see that article, you can catch it on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Manage Your Damn Money. Did you send that article to your mama? Like, Mama, I made it, look.
You know what? I don't even know if I sent it to my mom.
Oh, you tripping.
After you said, oh man.
You really tripping.
My mom watches the show, so I'm getting in trouble now. I didn't even think about it.
Her baby was quoted in CNBC and she didn't even know about it. Lord have mercy. Well, anyway, on this episode, as we always do, it is now time for headlines. Today's headline is Millennials earn 20% less than baby boomers did despite being better educated. This is a November 2019 piece on the publication we just mentioned, CNBC, by Megan Leon Hart. Millennials are facing a shortfall compared to other generations when it comes to their paychecks. Overall, millennials earn 20% less than baby boomers did at the same stage of life, according to the Emerging Millennial Wealth Gap, a recent report from the nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank New America. Specifically, media earnings for those 18 to 34 are lower than they were in the 1980s, a disparity that was first noted in the 2017 report from the nonprofit Young Invincibles. And the flow of today's paychecks is less predictable due in part to the effects of the Great Recession, which we've talked about on the show plenty of times, and a rise in the contract and freelance positions that may be less consistent in the hours and in the pay, Malcolm. The article also said, quickly as I turn the page, that's in spite of overall higher education levels. Nearly 40% of millennials 25 to 37 have at least a bachelor's degree compared to just a quarter of baby boomers and 30% of Gen Xers when they were the same age, the Pew Research Center found, Malcolm. And ironically, as I was preparing for this show, not too long after, like a minute after maybe like a couple hours after I finished it and sent it, I found another story from the Washington Post that said the staggering millennial wealth deficit in one chart. The divide widens with each generation, data shows, which is the byproduct of wage stagnation and income inequality. And this was by Christopher Ingram. A few things capture the precariousness of life for today's young adults, like the visualization of their wealth. Economist Gary Kimbrough did just that, using the Federal Reserve data to compare how generations fared financially at different points in their life cycles. Wealth is a measure, as we know, of what people own, their assets, which typically include home, cash, savings, and stocks, minus their debts like mortgages, student loans, and consumer debt. Malcolm, I could go on, but essentially the chart showed like boomers were here, like way up high in terms of wealth.
Back in their day or today?
Just at any particular point along their lifespan.
Okay.
So going from like their 20s on into their 30s, they were way up high. Then you had Gen X that came after the boomers, and they were like a good percentage lower in terms of what they were able to do. And the millennials are like way at the bottom, running along the bottom of the chart, like barely registering a tick in terms of how they've progressed from like 20 to 40 or whatever.
So basically, boomers wrecked the country, is what I'm hearing.
That's how I'm reading it. But you know, I don't want to get into that.
So in reality, though, if I can be like objective about this,
Absolutely.
the folks who were in power, in position at the time of the economic crisis that we're talking about, that like completely crushed hopes and dreams, were the people who are this boomer generation who is now retiring off of the work that they did.
Right.
So there is some credence. I was being facetious to a degree, but there is some credence to the fact that like boomers kind of wrecked it. And now they're looking to us to continue to pay into Social Security to keep them sustained in retirement. Right. But like, you kind of wrecked it.
Right. We kind of go through the American life thinking like one generation, the next generation is going to live a better life than the last.
You would hope.
You would hope. But this story about income and the story about this chart that I just described, it's literally the exact opposite. Like everybody below, so like our kids, like they're just gonna be walking around with cans and mugs, like, please sir, may I have some more?
I hope not.
But what does this mean for millennials who are hoping to make their way through 40 or 50-year careers? Like,
you know what? So interestingly enough, you asked that question about 40 and 50-year careers. And as you were talking about something else in the lead up to this, which was the prevalence of side hustles and the gig economy and contract work, it was making me think about, I've talked about on this show a few times, like my contemporaries who I graduated from, who are engineers, software engineers, programmers, that kind of stuff, who work for really prestigious old tech companies that we all know by name, use their products day to day and love them to some degree.
right.
They're all working on some sort of side project that they hope to God hits hard enough to rescue them from having to go work that job again tomorrow.
Wow.
So that's a really interesting and telling thing to me about where we are in this space. And there's a whole bunch of contributing factors, but if you just consider the fact that like our generation, our cohorts are looking and saying, I'm not doing this for 50 years.
Right.
Like I've only been doing it for 10 at the most.
I'm already done.
And I'm already saying I'm not doing it for 50 years.
Right.
So I have to figure out something that replaces my income enough that I can walk away from this and just do my own thing, because this is not the answer. So I think we're gonna see we end out in a totally different place. I don't know whether it'll be better or worse, but we'll end out in a totally different place than our parents and grandparents, just on the strength of our views of like how to do work, for lack of good grammar. How to do work just isn't the same as how other people thought about it before.
Absolutely. My final question before we go to break: how do people account for trends like not making as much as boomers did, being low on the totem pole in terms of wealth accumulation? How do people account for that in their own personal finances?
We just continue to complain about how it was wrecked, and people look to us and say, you figure it out. Like, what do you do? I mean, seriously, like you got these people who work, so we're in DC, federal government jobs are very prevalent.
Right.
And I joke with friends of mine who work for the Fed who are always complaining about the fact that like the person who's at the uppermost income band as a GS-15 doesn't know how to edit an Excel spreadsheet. Like, that is the perfect depiction of where we are at this point, where the folks who are in the position to do something are complaining about us as a generation But like they have done the things that have gotten us to the point that we're at, because we didn't have any power or control over anything in the workplace 10 years ago, or frankly, even today in a lot of cases.
Well, as we always do here on Manage Your Damn Money, supporting ageism and generational warfare, I want to remind you can always catch past episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Please leave us a review on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch the show. Of course, if you have a topic you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can always catch us on social media. My handle's @MYDM1, and that's on Twitter and Instagram. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
You can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where on this episode, we are talking about corporate trends that could affect your professional life. The vast majority of us will have to earn our way to financial freedom through that thing we see without fail 5 days a week, our jobs. For many, that work is dictated in large part by trends in corporate America. To stay ahead of the curve, it's crucial you have an understanding of shifts happening on the corporate landscape so you can take advantage of them. On this episode of Manage Your Damn Money, we're looking into corporate trends that could affect your professional life and how exploiting them can help you improve your own personal finances, Malcolm. So the first article that we kind of pulled for this, and I think of this as like knowing what's happening in the corporate world so you can make the right moves, was an article on the Wall Street Journal by Dieter Holger in October 2019, The Business Case for More Diversity. Diverse and inclusive cultures are providing companies with a competitive edge over their peers. So concluded the Wall Street Journal's research analyst in their first ranking of corporate sectors, as well as the individual companies in the S&P index, based on how diverse and inclusive those companies are. The financial industry overall was the best performing sector in the study, with banks and insurers dominating the list of 20 most diverse companies. The communication services.
That's interesting.
It is. It's very interesting, and we'll get into that. The communication services and consumer staples industries came in a close second and third, while the energy and materials sectors brought up the rear. Turns out the 20 most diverse companies in the research not only have better operating results on average than the lowest scoring firms, but their shares generally outperform those of the least diverse firms, the research shows. Malcolm, how surprising are these findings that diverse workforces net better returns in terms of business results?
That's not a surprise. Okay. If you think about just business in general and the way it operates, like let's take Google, for example. Google started out in the United States. It was dominating search in the US to the point that like they couldn't search anymore, right? And then they said, okay, we need to broaden our horizons and move into other markets geographically. So they moved into India and, Latin America and other places. They diversified basically the people that they were able to sell that search product to.
Right.
Essentially, it's the same thing. Like workforces, like banks, insurance companies, that sort of thing. Anybody who interacts with the public in general, there's only so long you can sell a product to one specific group of people before you've got to diversify out who your customer base is in order to grow. And what easier way to diversify the customer base than to diversify your sales force and the people that those customers interact with on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
So it makes perfect sense to me.
You did seem surprised, though, that the banking institutions in particular.
Oh, yeah, they lying.
You think they lying?
I've lived inside of those organizations long enough to know. Like, I don't know where they're hiding those people that they're claiming, but
this isn't their claiming. This is the Wall Street Journal research analysis of some kind.
Well, so here's the thing, though. What employees are they referring to?
I see
are they referring to support staff? Are they referring to executive level staff? Are they referring to, middle management? Like, where are these people?
That's a good point.
Because it's much easier to hire in support staff.
Right.
And they can look like whatever they want to or come from wherever they come from and speak whatever as their primary language or, whatever they're basing the diversity on. It's totally different, though, to say our executive level employees are made up of X diverse population percentage.
Right.
And that, I'm sure, is where those numbers in the air gets real thin.
Indeed. The article went on to say that the research showed that the 20 most diverse firms in the ranking have an average operating profit margin, the profit a company generates from its core business before interest and tax as a percentage of sales, of 12% compared with 8% for the lowest ranking companies. Their shares, meanwhile, had an average annual return of 10% in the 5 years through June 28 and 14% over the 10 years through June 28. Versus 4.2% and 12% for the 20 least diverse companies. The S&P 500 index posted annual gains of 8.9% and 14% respectively over the same periods. To create this ranking, the Wall Street Journal's environment, social, and government research analyst gave each company in the S&P 500 a diversity and inclusion score from 0 to 100. The scores were based on 10 metrics, including the age and ethnicities of the company's workforce, the percentage of women in leadership roles, whether the firm has diversity and inclusion programs in place for employees, and the makeup of its board. So it took into consideration some of the things you mentioned, Malcolm. And then larger companies tended to score better than smaller companies in the research, probably because bigger firms have more resources to devote to diversity and inclusion programs, the study found. But some say it could be the smaller companies that haven't faced the same kind of pressure that larger companies have to create more diverse and inclusive workspaces, Malcolm.
That's true.
Yeah, indeed. So how do you see analysis like this by the likes of the Wall Street Journal playing a role in seeing how large and small companies see diversity and profitability?
I think it does a great job of employing researchers. I don't think it goes very much further than that.
Indeed.
So,
indeed.
Everybody's got their diversity and inclusion officer inside these large Fortune 500 companies, which is great. One more diverse person employed. But beyond that, like, those people don't tend to have a seat at the table as far as like the executive team. Yeah. They're buried somewhere in like HR or special projects or something like that. Frankly, as soon as the market for that company turns, it's one of the first jobs to get cut. Right. And it's easy to do because it's buried inside of some other department. Right. So realistically, it's a great time to be in the diversity and inclusion research business. But like beyond that, like I just don't see very much progress being made.
True skeptic here today, Malcolm. So do you think businesses are truly taking note, or are they just paying lip service to the issue of diversity? I too have noticed the rise in the diversity and inclusion executive role just across the landscape in corporations.
Looks like a good job to have.
Every time I see one, I skeptically wince because it's something that's necessary, but if not given the resources and the actual interest in it, it's usually all for naught, at least from an outsider looking in point of view.
In my humble opinion, it is the CEO's job to make sure that diversity and inclusion becomes a core tenet of the business to actually move the needle on that. So to give you an example on a grander scale, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, I actually was at an event in New York somewhere where he was having a conversation, and the conversation was about like where the bank thinks its growth is going to come from, over the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And the conversation naturally tilted into diversity and inclusion is something that we have to take seriously if we're going to grow this business. I appreciated the fact that he tied it to the dollars and cents and didn't try to hide it as some sort of like passion project. And this is what I'm passionate about just because I'm a
nice guy.
I'm a really nice millionaire, and I feel like the world would be so much better if we all held hands and sang Kumbaya. Like, no, don't insult my intelligence. He genuinely was like, the only way this bank is going to grow any further than we already have is if we include those who have been excluded naturally for the last however many decades or centuries. Like, to me, that's where we can begin to have a real meaningful conversation about the need for diversity and inclusion, and then also what we're going to do about it.
I think it was interesting, though, when you see articles like this, kind of flipping it, when people see this kind of stuff, how can they use it to advance their own interest in terms of pursuing their dreams in different careers or career tracks?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because like a lot of times I'll have conversation with folks who are interested in a career in finance, or they're already at the early stages of their career in finance, and they see their diversity as a handicap, whether it's they're a woman or they're some sort of ethnic minority or whatever. They see it as a handicap, and I'm like, well, the good news is right now, while everybody's talking about diversity and inclusion, they got to hire somebody. Like, why not you? So, at the same time, there is some positive to it, just in the sense that, like, while the getting is good.
Absolutely.
Because if the job has to go to somebody and nobody else is applying, well, I mean, that's a good place to be in.
And two, certainly through the course of interviews and whatnot, an article like this definitely lends itself to, in certain situations, being talked about. It's like, hey, are you trying to become more profitable or not?
I don't know that I would see myself ever walking into a job interview and starting the dialogue around
at the right stage.
If they said, well, Ben, tell us how you're going to come and contribute to the organization. And you say, well, look, a study I read in the Wall Street Journal said, if you don't have any diversity here, you're not going to make any money. I personally would have a tough time like making that case, but more power to you. I wish you the best with that.
You could.
The challenge is you'd be in the minority once again. No pun intended, but like it's a lot less likely.
Yeah. So last question before we go to a music break. What are the greatest barriers to gatekeepers taking things like this article seriously and making committed changes to bringing on diverse talent?
You know what? So the go-to response whenever diversity and inclusion conversation used to come up when I first started in finance used to be, explain to me why this is even something I should care about. Like, why do I even need to worry about this whole diversity and inclusion thing? Because it's not my problem. At least in the time I've been doing this, 9 years basically that I've been in this business, the conversation has moved from why should I care to, well, we would hire more diverse talent if we could just find them. If we could just figure out where they are, we would definitely hire them. So at least that's some sort of progress where I'm not having to convince a room full of middle-aged white guys that diversity matters. And not me. I never bothered to try and take up that mantle because I'm not willing to push that boulder up the hill. But like, at least we moved from tell me why I should care to tell me how to go about doing it, which is a different nonsense answer, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
It's a better nonsense.
It's a better nonsense direction.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I remind people you can catch all the rest of our nonsense as an episode on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Of course, please leave us a rating on any of those episodes or platforms. That helps more people catch the show. If you have a topic or a question you want us to hit, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can catch us on social media, Instagram and Twitter @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we are talking about corporate trends that could affect your professional life. The next article that we pulled for this story, JP Morgan weighs shifting thousands of jobs out of the New York area. This is an October 2019 piece on Bloomberg.com by Michelle Davis. Speaking of Jamie Dimon earlier, JP Morgan Chase & Company's new Manhattan headquarters is meant to be an ode to both the company and the city, a monumental glass and steel tower that says the nation's largest bank grew up here. But New York may be losing its luster despite more than 2 centuries of history in a city synonymous with the global financial industry. JP Morgan is quietly shrinking its workforce there. The bank's been building up its presence in other locations and is now considering relocating thousands of New York-based employees out of the area to help rein in costs ahead of a possible economic downturn, according to people with knowledge of the bank's strategy. One option is to sell the investment banking headquarters at 383 Madison Avenue, which I think I've been to. The long main hub for JP Morgan's bankers and traders. Executives are deciding what roles could be relocated to lower cost hubs, such as Malcolm, get ready, Plano, Texas, Columbus, Ohio, or the amazing Wilmington, Delaware.
I would have to choose Wilmington, Delaware out of all of those places.
Really? Have you been to Wilmington?
No, but I know exactly where that office is because you can see it from the Amtrak as I'm traveling to a better city from D.C.
One day you're going to have to spend a year in one of these cities and it's going to be like karma coming back. But Malcolm, this story is framed around one bank's preparation for a possible economic downturn. Mm-hmm. But in an upcoming recession or possible recession aside, are you seeing more companies considering establishing a presence in mid-sized cities?
Well, I saw I guess not that much surprising, but I saw Wells Fargo Bank that was based in San Francisco, mm-hmm. bought Wachovia Bank that was based in Charlotte. And instead of moving their headquarters to where the acquirer mm-hmm. was, they moved everybody to Charlotte
where
the acquiree was.
Okay.
So it's the inverse of what you would normally expect. Mm-hmm. And the reason obviously is because Charlotte is a fifth of the cost of living as a San Francisco.
Right.
And so you can get similar or the same talent for a lot cheaper.
Right.
And your footprint costs a lot less.
Right.
That's the only one I can think of on that scale mm-hmm. that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. I'll believe it when I see it.
True. I mean, there's whenever I've seen it, it's been they're opening a hub which is a much smaller version of the main mm-hmm. in X city like Austin or Nashville. There was a big deal about when Amazon was doing their RFP for what city they would move to. Mm-hmm. Nashville, Tennessee ended up being a place that was getting some small subset of jobs and whatever else. But the article went on to say JP Morgan has already made plans to move hundreds of New York-based credit risk jobs to Texas and to station some senior-level employees of the consumer bank there, according to people with knowledge of the matter.
But those people aren't as hard to replace.
Yeah.
The consumer bank, the credit and risk people, those are tasks that are simple and repeatable, for lack of a better way to put it, mm-hmm. versus your Wall Streeters who are not going to take moving to Plano, Texas lightly.
Right.
And so they would be the ones I'd be concerned about losing because they could walk across the street literally and get a job basically anywhere else.
Right. JP Morgan also told some staff that the New York region will no longer be a hub for compliance in particular. Big banks and money managers have been moving employees away from New York and its surroundings to cheaper U.S. cities for years. Goldman Sachs Group, Inc. has built an operation in Salt Lake City. Deutsche Bank AG has expanded in Jacksonville, Florida, and Alliance Bernstein Holding LP last year announced plans to move its corporate headquarters to, as I mentioned, Nashville, Tennessee. Still, it's quietly accelerated the buildup of a new base in the Dallas suburb of Plano. The bank already has 25,000 workers in Texas and started construction this summer on a 12-story tower that will house 4,000 employees, increasing its total employment in the state. The moves are a response to a variety of forces that weigh on the companies doing business in New York, including high taxes, mm-hmm. really expensive real estate. I think New York might have the highest real estate price-wise in the country.
Close to it, at least.
JP Morgan is also making good on the threat to move jobs out of the city after Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration in 2014 rejected the bank's demand for as much as a $1 billion tax break and cash to keep employees in New York. Malcolm.
Plus, New York, some of the highest income taxes. Mm-hmm. Texas has no state income taxes. So there's a huge lift right there.
Right. To the extent, Malcolm, that there is a trend and that this was something that large corporations were looking at, what impact would this have on individuals who work at those companies on their personal finances?
Well, so here's the interesting thing, and I don't think this would actually happen personally. I think culturally it'll just be too tough to move folks from Wall Street to Texas. They have a hard enough time going to New Jersey, like, so I think it would be great if you said to me, Malcolm, we're going to take your Wall Street job, move you to Texas, but still pay you the same amount you're making in New York.
That's the thing.
That's huge.
Right.
But I think realistically what happens is they say, we're shrinking our footprint. We're going to go to a WeWork similar style office so that if you need to come in here physically, you have a place to pop in to the docking station and do some work. But mostly, we want you working off site because you don't have to physically be here every day to do your job.
Right.
That's where I see a lot of these larger financial services firms moving to. And I don't think JP Morgan Chase is going to be any different. Like if you don't actually have client facing duties where they're coming into the office to sit with you on a regular basis, you can do what you do from anywhere.
Right.
Go do it. But on the off chance that you actually need an office to do your work in,
Here's a space.
Here's a space for you also.
Let's assume that's the direction this is going. How does that help someone's personal finances?
Well, it helps your personal finances in the sense that you can live anywhere now.
Right.
So, let's say you are an analyst at JP Morgan and you make $150,000. You can willfully choose to move to Plano, Texas, where the cost of living is like half, let's say, let's say half of living in Manhattan. And that $150,000 now supports your entire household.
Right.
And you can do a lot with that in that space where you're probably still a little bit strapped in Manhattan at that $150,000 salary.
Right.
Or let's say you have a spouse who works also outside of the home and you've got young kids.
Right.
By moving to a place where that salary goes further, one of you could stop working.
Right.
That makes a significant difference, too, financially and from your planning perspective. So there's a lot of different things you can do if you don't have to physically go into the job every single day.
Absolutely.
Which is the reason everybody's complaining about you millennials moving to Nashville and Memphis and ruining the ecosystem that they moved there to retire to cheap land and cheap health care and everything else.
And meanwhile, not coming into work every day as you should, because when you need to work hard, because that's what you're supposed to do. Another trend that we pulled for this particular show, Microsoft tried a 4-day work week in Japan. Productivity jumped 40%. This was a November 2019 piece on CNN by Michelle Tall and Yoko Wakatsuki. Got it. A growing number of smaller companies are adopting a 4-day work week. Now, results of a recent trial at Microsoft suggest it could work even for the biggest businesses, Malcolm. The company introduced a program this summer in Japan called the Work-Life Choice Challenge, which shut down its offices every Friday in August and gave all employees an extra day of the week off. This actually, I'm going to take a complete diversion, Malcolm. This reminds me of my father-in-law's church, where every year during August, they do hour-long services during the month of August. And you would think that it would have an influence on the time of the other services outside of August. It doesn't. So anyways,
So it's an hour in August to get you back out there for summer?
That's the month they picked. It might have to do with summer, but I think that's just the month they picked at the church to have hour-long service for the month. I would think that it would just influence a little bit, maybe some of the other services.
Maybe we shorten this a little bit?
Yeah, nah, it's not happening. Anyways, the results were promising. While the amount of time spent at work was cut dramatically, productivity, measured by sales per employee, went up by almost 40% compared to the same period the previous year, the company said in a statement last week, Malcolm. So we recently, Malcolm, did a show not too long ago on the 4-day work week. Does Microsoft implementing the trial make it any more likely to get heavier trials in the States or no?
I think so, actually.
And you were pretty skeptical on that show where we talked about this.
I was. But I have, so I actually, full disclosure, have 2 clients who work for Microsoft. So I do know personally a little more inside the company now. And the reason this came up is because one of them did listen to the show and challenged me on it. So
do tell us more.
So interestingly enough, Microsoft piloted this in Japan because Japan has one of the strongest, or I should say, the weakest work-life balances of all developed nations as far as their citizens are concerned.
Right.
So the thought process was, if we can get Japan to agree to give their employees an extra whole day off, not even like cut overtime, like they had a whole crisis in Japan like 10 years ago or something where they sought to cut overtime to increase population growth and whatever. But just the fact that like Japanese workers work harder and longer hours than anybody else.
Right.
So the fact that this did as well as it did there, they're expecting that it'll like balloon out of control in the States, where people, even though we don't take much vacation, we still take more vacation than folks in Japan and China and places like that. But still not as much as a place like Europe, where they're already kind of relaxed and, you know, taking their summers and that kind of stuff. So the US is where it'll make the biggest impact, but the whole thought process was, if we can make it in Japan, we can make it anywhere.
Right, indeed. The article went on to say more than 90% of Microsoft's 2,200 employees in Japan later said they were impacted by the new measures, according to the company. By shutting down earlier each week, the company was also able to save on other resources, such as electricity. You got to keep the lights on when you're open on Fridays. The initiative is timely. Japan has long grappled with a grim and in some cases fatal culture of overwork, as you mentioned, Malcolm. The problem is so severe, the country has even coined a term for it, karoshi, that's spelled Karoshi, which means death by overwork from stress-induced illness or severe depression, Malcolm. And the issue attracted international attention back in 2015 when an employee at a Japanese advertising giant died by suicide on Christmas Day. Tokyo officials later said that the staffer had worked excessive amounts of overtime, which lends itself to a culture of work in Japan. So Malcolm, is this 4-day work week more of a culturally appropriate response from Microsoft to the news of, say, that employee? Or is this something that's actually like really going to be taken seriously like throughout the corporate world?
I believe it if Microsoft is saying it. So, you know, if Amazon said this, I'd be super skeptical. If Google said it, I'd be a little less skeptical, but still quite a bit so. But what I've seen is that Microsoft is actually, like, of the big tech titans, the old tech, if you will, Microsoft is actually the most generous when it comes to their employee benefits and the most responsive to the requests and needs of their employees. So things like maternity and paternity leave, for example, they're extremely loose, liberal, whatever the term is, culturally around that. And then also as far as employee benefits to help make your life better and to help you save for retirement and all that kind of stuff, like they're like the most generous that I've seen of those larger tech titans. So there's something to be said for it. I believe them.
Look, come on, Microsoft. So Microsoft aside, what other companies do you see, maybe just give me one, that you see capable of doing this? Even doing a pilot. Like, I'm not even gonna say they have to do it like forever, but like a pilot of some kind.
A large company that I see buying into this?
Culturally and otherwise. We know Amazon's not doing this.
Right, Amazon's got the opposite problem. They pay their workers to quit.
Right.
I don't know. Like, honestly, that's a really tough one to me. I think maybe an industry like automotive automakers, where they still are up against tight, strong labor unions, as evidenced by this most recent, was it GM or Ford? Whoever just had this most recent strike that lingered on for a really long time.
I vaguely remember.
Like the fact that they have these strong labor unions, I think it's possible for one or all of those automakers to start insisting on an extra day. Beyond that, I don't know, man, because I don't know who has the support to make it happen.
The only thing that I thought of was, and just based on kind of the shows that we've done here, is Salesforce. Because they have that CEO who's really like altruistic in terms of his outlook on capitalism and all that kind of stuff. So that's the company that, from my readings, is someone
until he sells the company.
Right, exactly. But at least as things stand now, in my mind, they would be somewhat of a candidate. In closing, like, if things were to move to a 4-day work week, how would that help people's personal finances and their money?
Well, if you just think about on a very simple level, the amount of money that you spend on work-related costs. So you got to travel to work, you got to buy clothes, presumably, you got to put on clothes, clean them, feed yourself while you're at work. You got to put gas in the car to get you there. You got to pay somebody to watch your kids while you're busy at work making the money to do the job.
Well.
You got all these costs that go into leaving your house and doing that job.
Right.
That suddenly you have, if you work a 5-day work week, 20% less expense overnight.
Right.
So what will you do with 20% more money? A lot, probably.
Yeah.
So if you just think about it that way, like there's a huge trade-off that comes from not having to go to work one extra day a week.
Definitely, definitely. Well, we hope some of those corporate trends will help you see into the future a little bit to help kind of get your situation a little further along, do a little better with your money and in your career and jobs. But as we always do, I want to remind you, you can catch past episodes of Manage Your Damn Money on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. And of course, please leave us a rating and a review on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch the show. If you have a topic or question you want us to answer, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can always catch us on social media. My handle's @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And that's on Instagram and Twitter. And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. Thanks to our partners once again here at Montgomery Community Media for their amazing hospitality and another amazing show. Until next time, be good with your money.
Peace.
Peace.